very good evening to you. I am Lisa Lord, and in our headlines, one of the most influential figures in local journalism has been laid to rest. Barbados' efforts to combat NCDs attracts attention from the World Health Organization. Call for a better system to deal with domestic violence. And in sports, the BDF sports program lifts the BFA Premiership despite going down to Wales in Game 3.
Broadcasting from our studios in the Pine St. Michael, this is CBC News Night, starting now.
In our top story, a titan in the journalism profession in Barbados was laid to rest today. Hundreds led by Governor General Dame Sandra Mason and Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley turned out at the Garfield Sobers Gymnasium to pay their respects to Harold Hoyt, the founder of the Nation newspaper and a giant in his professional and personal life. And we will have that story a little later in our newscast. While Barbados has been praised for its current fight in tackling non-communicable diseases, it came at the ongoing World Health Assembly of the World Health Organization in Geneva. 1/4 of the adult population in Barbados has a NCD, and if left unchecked, it could rise to about 1/3 by 2025. But plans by the government, the private sector and civil society to comprehensively treat to reducing this in a systematic way have been deemed as a model for other member states to follow. There was also focus at the Assembly on how Barbados is preparing both its population and healthcare system to be resilient and adaptive with constant challenges in the face of climate change. Now, Barbados Ambassador and Permanent Representative in Geneva, Chad Blackman, was in attendance. He says that Barbados must not become complacent because of the praise.
We actually have to continue to strive to have forward thinking and unconventional ways to ensure that our population enjoys a high quality of life and are the most productive and healthiest citizens anywhere in the world. The linkage between sport, diet, and work-life balance cannot be underestimated, and it is for this reason that the private sector and civil society must continue to walk hand in hand with the government in this regard, as we actually seek to ensure that our country can meet these challenges head-on.
Health officials in Barbados are pushing for front-of-package labeling for pre-packaged food. That initiative is part of efforts in the fight against childhood obesity. Senior Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Arthur Phillips, expects that the move will yield results, and he was speaking at the launch of the Switch It Up, Protect Our Children multimedia campaign.
Local stakeholders have indicated support for simple, effective labeling which identifies foods that are high in sugar, salt, and fat. The relevant scientific literature indicates that warning labels of the type proposed by the Caribbean Regional Organization for Standards and Quality are helpful to consumers, and we are certainly advocating for CARICOM and Barbados to move forward with this so that we can better inform consumers and that we can have improved impacts on health.
And Dr. Phillips says the Ministry of Health has been tackling childhood obesity in various ways over time.
Certainly, prior to birth, we provide for detection and management of obesity and diabetes in pregnancy, which, when present in the mother, increase the risk of childhood obesity. We continue to promote breastfeeding for its benefits, including reduced risk of obesity and other NCDs. And nationally, our children are screened in the public and private sectors during their growth and development assessments, and those who are overweight or obese are counseled and supported by healthcare staff, including our nurses, doctors, and nutritionists, and others. In our schools, there continues to be provision for physical activity, and internationally reviewed and approved guidelines have been developed by Ministry of Health and Wellness on nutritious and healthy foods in schools.
Well, also speaking at that launch was former veteran trade unionist Orlando Scott. He pointed out that the onset of non-communicable diseases is having an impact on the workplace but is often overlooked. Mr. Scott is a champion of the Childhood Obesity Prevention Campaign. He says NCDs and obesity in all forms result in burdensome human and monetary costs.
We have to work assiduously to change dietary habits and move to improve physical activity among our young people. And I must say this. I grew up in a little village called Charnox many years ago, almost 70 years ago. And in my day, we used to be playing cricket on the streets. on the pastures between homes. And nowadays, when I go up in Charnock, I don't even see people playing the fool. You know, I mean, everybody is glued to his or her home.
Well, as we told you earlier, a titan of the journalism profession in Barbados was laid to rest today. Hundreds, led by Governor General Dame Sandra Mason and Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley, turned out at the Garfield Sobers Gymnasium to pay their respects to Harold Hoyt, the founder of the Nation newspaper and a giant in his professional and personal life. Our Lisa Broom was there.
It was a service devoid of much of the pomp and pageantry associated with an official funeral. It was all in keeping with one of the many glowing descriptions of the journalism titan. Despite all of his achievements, Harold Fitzgerald Hoyt was a simple man who loved his family and those around him. So the Royal Barbados Police Force presented a musical prelude, but there was no parade of people with lofty tributes for the man who was also described as a giant, not only by his friend of 41 years, Barbados's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Liz Thompson, but by the countless others whose lives he touched. In her eulogy, Ambassador Thompson traced the major highlights of Mr. Hoyt's life, which were tightly interwoven with the birth and development of the Nation newspaper. She reinforced much of what has been said about the 77-year-old, talking about his unquestionable integrity and raw talent, accompanied by an uncanny creativity that led to the paper becoming the voice of democracy in Barbados.
It was built to ensure that Barbadians had a mirror to themselves. It was built in post-colonial Barbados 6 years after independence, 7 years after independence, so that those who were voiceless, those who were not represented by the news of the day, those who were underprivileged and poor and felt that they had no place in society, could find a place and a voice and an expression. And it was built to show a small nation that you could be the best.
Ambassador Thompson also recalled Mr. Hoyt's unswerving love for his family. Mr. Hoyt was a faithful member of Trinity Outreach Ministries, and in his sermon, Reverend Michael Critchlow said he saw a private side of Mr. Hoyt in the many one-on-one sessions they had over the years.
If we were to develop a loving relationship with God, we would be a more peaceful people. If more of us were to develop a love for one another, or fellow brothers and sisters, we would have less anger and violence in our society, with more cooperation. After all, in unity there is strength. You see, love for God is the genesis of love for humanity. And we must not forget the biblical injunction which says that we are even to love our enemies.
Reverend Critchlow says Barbados would be better if there were more people like Mr. Hoyt who loved God, each other, and country. After the service, Mr. Hoyt was interred at the cemetery at Coral Ridge. Lisa Broom, CBC News.
Violence is rearing its ugly head as Barbados undergoes an austerity program. Given what the National Organization of Women has been hearing from women, Public Relations Officer Marcia Hines wants government to put mechanisms in place to protect them and their children.
There is a need to put stronger mechanisms in place to help those types of families. We know that there is supposed to be the family court open very shortly, but in order for the family court to be effective, it will need an ecosystem. So in the same way that a traditional court will have prison, it will have probation and that kind of thing working along with the actual court, the family court to be effective needs its own ecosystem. So we will need programs for perpetrators, we will need support for victims, we will need counseling for victims.
And now also commended financial institutions that are working with Barbadians who have lost their jobs during government's retrenchment exercise.
We know for a long time now that women across Barbados have been under severe financial duress. I don't think that has quite changed yet, but more and more we're hearing from women at least that they feel like when they go into certain agencies and that kind of thing, that there is a willingness to work. So I know, for example, in the retrenchment process, some banks, some financial lending institutions would have come on board to be able to restructure debt, to be able to lend some support to households.
Well, the Barbados Postal Service is moving to safeguard itself from pending security threats. Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs, Deborah Payne, says that they are modernizing their systems, and she has asked public workers to remain vigilant.
Through the procurement of top-of-the-line scanners to identify contraband and other illegal goods, tighten our operational processes, and partner with the airlines and shipping agencies, the police, immigration, and customs department. Continuous training in this regard is key.
Ms. Payne was speaking during the opening ceremony of a workshop on operational readiness for e-commerce at the Caribbean Postal Training Center at the General Post Office this morning. She says the Postal Service must be prepared to play a key role in the e-commerce sector.
Postal Service operators must realize that they will have to deliver more than just mail to remain relevant in a 21st century environment. You have to be cognizant of the competitive environment in which we now operate and must be prepared to change to meet the demands of a global market. Yes, I know, change comes with many challenges, but we must confront these directly and be proactive rather than reactive if we are to survive. Instead of falling into obsolescence, the Post needs to adapt quickly to the demands of this rapidly growing and evolving market.
The University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus is increasing its on-campus accommodation capacity to cater to more regional and international students. This morning, Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor Professor Eugene Baratow, along with other officials, broke ground for a new 6-story hall of residence. Now, the new complex will be constructed to the east of the Keith Hunt Hall on University Drive. Professor Baratow says the new complex will meet the increasing demands for rooms and satisfy the needs of the disabled students.
The new block, which we are launching, is designed as a 6-story building comprising approximately 38,000 square feet. Each floor will consist of 16 single bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and 2 living kitchen areas with an internal stairwell and an elevator. Apart from the elevator, it will offer other features that indicate Cave Hill is a disability-friendly space, in keeping, of course, with our inclusive, student-centered philosophy. The block will add a further 100 units to bring our overall number of on-campus rooms for student accommodation registrar to almost 450.
Well, Principal Baratow adds the construction of the dorms will be funded through a collaborative venture. Well, the Elliott Belgrave Primary School will reopen tomorrow. This follows the completion of industrial cleaning at the Gay St. Peter's School. Regional stories now, and Guyana celebrated its 53rd anniversary of political independence yesterday. In his message to mark the day, President David Granger reminded citizens that the future of the nation belongs to young people. He says the coalition government is working to prepare them to assume critical roles. President Granger noted that in the future, greater opportunities due to oil production and policies of the Green State Development Strategy would become available. Well, in a few days' time, Trinidad and Tobago's government will start registering Venezuelans who are entering the country illegally. Now, the registration process starts on May 31st and will end on June 14th. Chief Immigration Officer Charmaine Gandhi Andrews explained what rights will be afforded to the Venezuelans under the amnesty in this TTT Live online report.
It is meant to, one, account for how many Venezuelans are actually here, but recognizing that a number of them have come into this country as economic migrants. I'm not going to use the word refugees because that has a different connotation and that has a different definition.
Right.
So they have come here for economic reasons, and government has taken the bold step to grant an amnesty to the Venezuelan nationals who are here and who we know are working illegally in Trinidad and Tobago.
Ms. Gandhi Andrews explained that after their registration, the Venezuelans will receive a card.
And the card, that really is a permit for them to remain and work legally.
Is this an ID card?
No, it's not an ID card.
Okay.
And it is not a card that gives them permanent residence. It's not a card that gives anybody an entitlement to vote. And I'll clear that up right away. It is a card that allows them to remain and work legally in the country. It's granting them what we call in immigration and under the law a minister's permit.
As mentioned, the minister's permit allows the registered Venezuelan to stay in TNT to work legally. The chief immigration officer explained other rights that the Venezuelans will have.
They are entitled to emergency health care. There's some primary health care that will be available to them. And other than that, they will have to go to some private medical.
So they'll have to pay?
Yes, and they will have to
Education?
pay. No education.
Okay.
A number of vendor stalls in Jamaica were destroyed as the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation conducted a cleanup operation in the area. As we hear in this TVJ report, illegal dumping was only one of the breaches discovered during that exercise.
The operation started 6 o'clock Sunday morning on several roads in downtown Kingston. According to Dwayne Anderson of the KSAMC, the operation was necessary because of an increase in unsightly structures erected along these roads, including illegal vending stalls.
These structures poses hazards to various members of the community, children, senior citizens, and disabled persons. Whilst conducting this operation, we would have removed 30 truckloads of debris. We also noticed that there is a nuisance of commercial waste all over the streets, such as Princess Street, Orange Street, Beckford Street.
The KSAMC believes business operators in the area are the main perpetrators, lining the roadways with commercial garbage each evening instead of making arrangements for proper disposal. But that's not all.
We also identified that many of these locations, persons would have illegally attached to the Jamaica Public Service utility poles to abstract electricity for their business. We also identified that persons would have defaced signs around these areas, street signs.
Street-side vendors were also found in breach as garbage from their sales the night before were still seen hanging on walls, cables, and everywhere possible. By the end of the operation, some 30 truckloads of garbage were removed from the area.